A psychotherapist and I run a small business called The Workplace Therapist here in Canberra. And this is a little workshop about a subject close to my heart and close to my experience as someone who has both paid and unpaid caring roles. Compassion fatigue is an occupational hazard that comes to those of us who find ourselves drawn to help and care for others. Just as if we are lifting heavy things for a profession, minding our back and potentially getting back injuries are an occupational hazard. Compassion fatigue is the name that came around in the 80s that describes that particular flavour of struggle that is unique to the experience of giving so much of yourself to others, of caring, worrying about, giving energy to others. It's a mixture of burnout and vicarious trauma. The nurses are the number one owners of compassion fatigue, but as you can imagine, all sorts of professions are impacted: doctors, teachers, police, counsellors, therapists, and all the unpaid caring roles that we have: parenting, looking after elderly parents. All of these things have a cumulative effect on our ability to get the enjoyment and satisfaction that we get from caring professions. The decline in our well-being and in our satisfaction and the delight in this type of work happens slowly over time, and self-management and recovery are something that also happens slowly over time, that have a cumulative effect. So there is no magic pill, sadly. But what I hope you get from this workshop is just an acknowledgement that there is nothing wrong with you as a person. It does not mean that you are not suited to having caring professions if you are feeling any of these symptoms. For me, it will be irritation and just feeling peopled out, just really feeling like anybody else speaks to me, I just can't. I notice my signs of compassion fatigue are more likely to come up with friends who are going through difficult things, that then, I just don't have enough in the tank to be the friend that I'd like to be, and then the guilt and shame that comes after that. Luckily, I haven't experienced too much compassion fatigue with clients, which as a self-employed person is quite important. But as you can see from this list of symptoms, one of the ones that sort of often causes a lot of distress is the ability to empathize or to feel concern and care for our patients or our clients, which can really erode that sense of self if this type of work is a calling, and if we start to not be able to do what's essential in this type of work, then that can lead to a really distressing sort of unraveling of, okay, well, what now? So don't ignore these signs, but also don't panic about these signs if possible. So knowing the signs, self-awareness is really key, and we all do struggle in a slightly different way. So sometimes it's helpful to think in these different buckets. We tend to notice more when we're struggling physically. There's an achiness, a soreness. We're more susceptible to picking up coughs and colds and that sort of thing. We might be undersleeping, oversleeping, all our unhealthy coping mechanisms may have kicked in, drinking. A bit of a telltale sign is sort of when we feel like we've really earned our binge drink. Well, I've worked so hard, so I can just write myself off all weekend, which obviously can help short term, but longer term could be problematic and doesn't help with the enjoyment the next week. Mental symptoms for me, I notice less of a busyness, but more of just an emptiness of I just can't make a decision, or I can almost feel the cogs turning in my mind. Some people, it's thoughts racing. Most of us, when we're struggling, our inner critic, that delightful voice or voices in our head that tells us we're not good enough, gets louder. Might be looking to sort of blame people. It's hard to assume the best in others. That's why often in professions where compassion fatigue is a big hazard, staff tend to turn on each other or get really wound up by behaviours of each other because there's not much in the tank, you know. Catastrophizing, ruminating, rigid black and white thinking, all of those sorts of things can be signs. Emotionally, there can be either a numbness. For me, I mentioned irritability is probably my go-to. Sadness, anger, resentful, judgmental, very victim feeling. No one really understands it, that sort of thing. And then thinking about in the spiritual bucket, that word doesn't work for everybody, but thinking just about purpose and values. When we're really low in that area, it's that, what's the point? Why am I doing this anyway? You know, is it really helping? Is it really making a difference? And so whatever helps support you and your sense of purpose and knowing why you do what you do can be a really helpful one to up the ante on when you are low in that area. So I know that we are all very busy, that it's incredibly relatable to feel like we do not have the time for self-care, and certainly incredibly unhelpful to watch a video like this and be told, oh, look, everything's going to be fine. Just simply start jogging for an hour every morning and meditating for an hour every evening. Ta-da! If you are able to do that and that works for you, then fantastic. But it's really about what very small little shifts can I make? What are small, conscious, repeatable actions of self-care that add to my day rather than become a burden? And that is when this concept of micro breaks can be an absolute game changer. So micro breaks are proven to be as effective as a long lunch break if we're taking them regularly. So by micro, we mean anything from 40 seconds to 5 minutes. Recommended that we take these once an hour. And they're basically characterized by an action that puts us in a different headspace, or a different sort of place emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, for just that short period of time before we then go back into work mode. Lots and lots of different ways to do this, no right or wrong. I'll just shout out a few examples. So mental can be about doing some kind of meditation, whether you like to close your eyes and focus on your breath, whether you like to look out the window and look at the trees moving, whether you like to drink a cup of tea, but really, really drinking the cup of tea. So when you're choosing where your mind is focusing on, sometimes a good use of a micro break is to write down all those things that keep popping in your head and then you're forgetting, you know, making it a life admin to-do list in the middle of when you've just finished a task at work could be an example of a micro break. It doesn't have to be just emptying your mind completely, but it's consciously focusing onto something else. Emotional micro breaks, that's about really paying attention and checking in with yourself. How am I feeling? And we can do a little exercise right now where we just look inside. So if you want to close your eyes, close your eyes. But just being really curious with yourself and just asking yourself in that kindly way that we offer to others, and how am I feeling? You know, what do you notice? Any physical sensations, any emotions? And emotions really just need to be acknowledged and allowed to be there. And so if you are aware of an emotion or a physical sensation, just practice staying with it. Not trying to change it, make it wrong, do anything other than just be with it. And letting it do whatever it does, and just sort of coming out of that when you like. So an emotional micro break can be just sitting with our emotions, being that empathic friend to ourselves that we're probably really good at doing for other people, but not doing it so much for ourselves. It can also be consciously evoking an emotion that you want to feel. If you're feeling really flat, maybe it's watching a funny YouTube video. Maybe it's having a laugh with a friend, you know, sharing a joke. Maybe if you're feeling really, really angry, maybe it is punching it out on a punching bag, or drawing how you feel, you know. So that's an example of different micro breaks. Physical, we're probably more likely to take a stretch when we need it. So just taking a stretch and, oh, isn't stretching good? And just keeping your breath in line with your movement can really help to make it a mindful experience. So maybe breathing in as you twist to one side, breathing out, breathing in, and twisting round to the other side. Maybe you're twisting to the side. Maybe you're doing some yays. So this position here, this is a power pose, but it's also called a yay. This symbol is what primates and infants the world over do when they are expressing delight, and it can start to evoke pleasant feels. If I wasn't recording on a screen, I would do this, but I will just instruct you. So we'll, combining a yay to standing is a really great physical micro break because it activates your quads, your hammies, your glutes, or your big muscles. You get to stand up and yay, shout it out. Do 5 of them and just notice how you feel. It really shifts your energy, really can help put you in a different space. So combining physical, emotional, mental. A spiritual micro break might look like meditation. It might look like doing some reading. If you have a religion, it might look like praying. It might look like travel for a lot of people is a spiritual experience. You're thinking about anything that sort of takes you out of the self-absorbed nature of what is often accompanied with struggle and into something bigger, you know. Looking up at the sky can be really good to just remind yourself of, wow, just how big everything is and how small this is in it. My experience is in comparison. Can feel really helpful on a good day, not so helpful on a bad day. So bearing that in mind. Colouring is a lovely micro break. Anything sort of a little bit creative often just shifts you into that different sort of space. And it's proven that people who engage in regular micro breaks have better cognitive performance, lower stress levels, and better relationships. So this is a gift for yourself and others to take this on. Now, another little self-awareness activity that you can do, and I recommend doing, if you grab yourself a paper plate or just a piece of paper, you can draw a plate on it. But it's a good opportunity to do. I do this once every couple of weeks, really. You just give yourself a few minutes and just download everything currently going on that is causing you a certain level of stress, and is taking up energy. And it can be therapeutic just to get it all out onto the plate, have a look at it, notice how you feel about it. And notice as well, all right, what is on this plate that doesn't actually have to be? Sometimes there are things, often there are things that they just are. But often our plate, my plate often tells me very helpful things. It might be, okay, so stop being the president of the PNC, for example. A plate once told me, which I listened to, and it was very right. Or it's time to get the cleaner again. Doesn't matter about the budget. This house stress is taking up a lot of your plate. It might be a relationship that's really causing a lot of stress, so maybe it needs a bit of time away from the relationship. Maybe you need to have a sort of facilitated conversation. Maybe you just need to have a difficult conversation about it. Maybe it is work and the lack of resources and the lack of people to sort of cover shifts or whatever. What can you do then? Giving yourself permission to take time that you need, not engaging in the commentary that can come up in workplaces about, taking time and we don't have people, trying not to sort of engage in that, prioritizing yourself. Whatever comes out onto your plate will give you an indication of what's a good next step. And sometimes it's just to go, well, no wonder I'm buggered, look at all of this. And it can be the start of a process to sort of become aware of, well, what changes do I need to make? What boundaries do I need to think about putting into place, get a little bit more comfortable with? We often tell people, oh, you just need better boundaries. It's not easy. It is really not easy. Something that was really quite shocking for me to hear, but also quite helpful. I was in a workplace and they told me that their big boss had recently spoken to Dun & All staff and said, right, everyone, we know that this is an incredibly busy time of year and it's busy period and we can't do anything to alter the workflow. But my personal tip to you is find the busiest person that you can see and ask them for help, because they obviously cannot say no. And it's a shocking thing for someone to say, but it is a very honest and accurate reflection of what happens if we can't protect our time and our energy. People don't have to be mean or selfish or anything to take what we are willing to give. And this is an ongoing lesson for me. But if we give more than we have capacity to, or if we're giving it conditionally, hoping that people will then like us more or, think we're awesome or whatever, then it's a really good indication that without some boundaries, then resentment's the only go-to. So maybe it is practicing saying no, or maybe it is practicing not laughing at jokes you don't find funny, for example. Maybe it is being choiceful about who you are open with if you're a naturally open person. Physical touch boundaries can be really difficult for some people to set and really important to set. So if, for example, you're working with someone who's always touching you and you don't like to be touched, then, I'm really sorry. Can you please stop touching me? I don't really like it, for example, So just practicing. Some people are really good at boundaries, and in a group situation, I always say, who here is really good at saying no? One or two people usually put up their hand, and then I get the opportunity to say to everyone, and do you all hate these people? Probably they wouldn't say yes, even if they did, but usually there's a very genuine no. That's often the fear that if we have boundaries, people won't like us as much, or we won't be seen as helpful and all of those things. But what typically people just know where they stand. And something that one type of boundaries that, especially in this type of work, especially when you are both dealing with people who are in distressed or vulnerable times, so are in an emotional sort of state themselves, and dealing with your own emotions around life, work, content that you're working with. Really important to consider how strong or otherwise these two layers of emotional boundaries are for you. So containment is that sort of the boundary that protects yourself and others from your big feelings. So containment boundaries are strong when we have an ability to be aware of how we're feeling and an ability to regulate that feeling. So that might be with physical touch. You might notice I put my hand on my chest a lot. It's a very soothing sort of position for me. There's a video that comes with this video of havening, which can be a pleasant thing for some. Sometimes just naming how you're feeling goes 50% of the way to regulating it. Being self-aware helps to acknowledge your own feelings, regulate them without them all spilling over. When my containment boundary is porous or non-existent, people around me know, that sort of when it's all hanging out, and it's I like to think it's part of my charm, but often it's not actually. Like, it's actually just a little bit full on, So that's the containment boundary. And then the protective boundary is what protects us from other people's emotional state. And this protection boundary it's not shutting off. It's actually what we need to have in place in order to maintain empathy and compassion for another person. We need to know that their feelings are their feelings, and that we're separate to that. Without the protective boundary, it all floods in. And if we're around someone who's in a bad mood, then we feel we're in a bad mood, or we feel it's all our fault that they're in a bad mood. Which in the course of a day, the amount of people that you have interact with or whatever, without any kind of protective boundary, that's going to have a pretty exhausting impact. So however you do it, some people visualize being in bubbles. I worked with someone once who, a very sensible man, he goes, oh, I just get my lasers out. He was working on the phones, taking a lot of abuse all day, and he would imagine with his lasers just deflecting it, giving it back. Someone taught me this thing where she was working with a lot of difficult people, and in meetings she would just go, let it go to the keeper. She would make this subtle movement that she knew was happening. She was bringing her conscious mind to say, not mine. That is not mine. I'm not taking it on. Chinese medicine believes that we store other people's energy on our limbs, so brushing off after a difficult situation can be helpful. Likewise, another Chinese medicine one is zipping up our central meridian line from our pubic bone right up to our mouth. And we put a tongue on the roof of your mouth as you breathe in. 3 times, breathing in. Last one. and then you're all protected. It doesn't really matter if you believe this or not. It's about your conscious brain making that decision, repeatedly making that decision so that it becomes second nature to protect yourself. It's not cold, it's not distance, it's actually the only way that we can keep caring. Now, debriefing is really helpful, and venting can be really helpful, especially if you're a verbal processor. But very often we don't vent well. We basically just gossip and blame and spread that sort of energy of a little bit of victimness, you know, because it's a little bit about what everyone else has done, and they said this and I can't believe it, and they did this again, and da da da. And often we find ourselves working with people who aren't fair and reasonable, and it's really important to be able to have space to process that and to get support. But making sure that when we're venting, we're actually focusing on ourselves, we're actually taking care of ourselves, we're actually honestly communicating how we feel and what we need is far more helpful than just staying up at this wound up space. Oh, and they did this and then they said that. No, 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 no. And it's a lot easier to be around for other people to be around as well. So a couple of important points. Always seek consent. So, oh, I've just had a really difficult time. Have you got 5 minutes? I just need to vent, or I just need to debrief, and normalize saying no to that. Sometimes we're not, and we don't have capacity. And to be able to say, sorry, no, I don't have capacity is a really healthy, great thing to be able to do. And then try and use facts. You know, try not to get carried away with all of the adjectives describing how dreadful the person or thing is. Talk about what's actually happened and how you feel about it, and what you might need. Far more, even just as I say that, I just feel it's far more relaxing. It's far more resilient. It's far more self-confident, because you're no longer a sort of a victim of a terrible ongoing situation. You are an individual who's able to acknowledge the impact, which puts you in a much better place to be able to start problem solving as well. So the energy management, following a similar model, this is just about basically being a bit curious with yourself, another way of checking in with yourself, and how much have I got in each of my tanks. And helpful model, because if we are feeling very low on emotional energy, for example, then we may well need time completely alone, or we might need time with a friend, good friend, you know. If we're feeling totally low on mental, we might need total silence. We might need to write some lists. We might need to get some organization in place to help, you know, prevent sort of further drain on our mental energy. We might need to talk. We might need to meditate. Physical, again, maybe we do need more exercise. Maybe we just need some more rest. And spiritual, that depleted thing, maybe we need to recheck in. Why is it that I do what I do? What is important to me? Am I making sure I've got enough of what is important to me in my life? And being able to be nuanced with our self-care like this, so that we're not just following a routine, which works great, really well for some people, and that's fantastic. But more so if we're like, well, what do I need right now? I've got 5 minutes right now. Am I going to benefit more from doing 5 minutes of star jumps, or 5 minutes of lying down with earplugs and a mask, you know? Because when we get it right, we get that rejuvenated boost in energy. When we get it wrong, it just sort of depletes us further. Anything that we do that is good for ourselves tends to top up all of our buckets. It's just another way of tending for yourself in a careful way. Now, I love this. This comes from Buddhism, and it's the double arrow theory, and it talks to the point that in life, things happen. Life is suffering, as is the start of a famous Buddhism text. But the first arrow talks about the thing that has happened. You know, you've crashed the car, whatever, right? That's the first arrow. The second arrow is all of the story, the meaning making, the self-critiquing or the blaming. It's all of the additional stuff that we add to the initial difficult thing. Unfortunately, our human brains are wired to are wired in a way that the second arrow is not often a helpful, kind, soothing arrow, which is actually what we need in the face of a difficult event. Using the car crash, maybe we've gone, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I'm such an idiot driver. It's no wonder I'm so busy, whatever. What we actually need is, oh, how stressful. That's awful. I can't believe that happened. It's sort of the way that a friend would respond to us in the face of difficulty. And this leads us on to this field of self-compassion. And along with this video, I'm also sharing a little online sort of toolkit, a series of exercises that you can do called Be a Better Friend to Yourself, all designed to help start to make that second arrow a little bit more helpful. So start to respond to yourself in a way that is more kind, that in a way that is more supportive and more in line with how you would respond to someone that you care about. These three elements are really important. Mindfulness is about acknowledging what is. It's about how you're feeling, you know. Self-kindness is how you behave towards yourself, how you speak to yourself. And common humanity is really, really important. Common humanity is all about the universality of struggle. It's all about our connectedness. And this is really important when we're struggling, because when we are struggling, we tend to go into isolation mode. We do this in two ways. We tend to either think, oh, no one understands what I'm going through. Or we think, oh, well, everyone else is totally fine. It's only me that's struggling. However we tend to do it, it's not particularly helpful, because in that moment of struggle, what we really need is to feel connected. So common humanity is all about building up that part of you that truly believes that everybody struggles sometimes, because we do. It is part of being human. Much more of that in the online toolkit, which I hope that you access. And we will finish this little workshop with a third space activity. So a third space is a beautiful type of micro break that you can do. You can do it after each activity. You can do it when you're shifting between modes. Maybe you're going from work mode to home mode. It's all about managing transitions. Instead of just racing from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, it's about bringing some conscious awareness to how you transition. And studies done on people who regularly engage in a third space practice to manage their transition from work to home found that the people doing the third space practice, their well-being increases, but the people that they are going home to, if they live with other people, their well-being increases by on average 40%. So that is massive. We can do third space activities in lots of different ways, but the stages are important. Reflect on what happened. That was a nightmare. Rest and get present. Reset. What's next? And how do I want to show up? It can be as simple as that. Or at the end of a day, you could journal about your day. You could go for a jog listening to your favorite tunes. And then you could drive home, and before you get into the house, you could look at photos of family members or housemates. You could imagine what kind of day they may have had. And you can choose and visualize yourself entering the house, engaging how you'd like to. So let's just do it as a little meditation now. So with your eyes closed, getting yourself comfortable, slowing down your breathing. And if you like, hand on your chest, hand on your belly. And just letting your mind go over the past half hour or so. And just giving your mind the chance to process, noticing anything that stood out, any thoughts, calls to action. And then letting go of that and bringing yourself into the present. So noticing the little movements that your body makes as you breathe. Noticing the sensation of the air where it touches your face. Bringing your awareness to your feet. Giving your toes a little wiggle. And then just starting to get a little bit of movement, rolling your shoulders. And then bringing to mind what you've got coming up next. Noticing how you feel about your next activity. If there are people involved, bringing them to mind. And choosing the energy you want to take with you into your next activity. And visualizing yourself showing up how you'd like to. Engaging how you'd like to. Big stretch. Giving yourself a bit of a smile. Opening up your eyes. And please do stay in touch. Love to hear any feedback, questions. There's some other resources coming through with this, some meditations. Thank you for the incredibly important work you do, and I hope that you got something from this session. Take care.